Port Deepwater wakes up to a radiant morning and trouble in the air. A blockade has drawn up during the night, following up on a trade dispute with a neighboring rival. Trouble is sure to follow because this city, this freehold, depends on trade, on crime, on corruption, on commerce to keep its people fed. And a blockade is one of those things that will drive them to the streets in outrage. The Deepwater citizens are not, however, the only ones affected negatively by this blockade. There is also Karg's emissary sent to this melting pot at the crossroads of various trade routes to retrieve Torga, an orc of some social standing formerly exiled and now set to be retrieved to the orc homeland, the Iron States of Mirakan, to be wed. Except she's not exactly on board with the idea and thus had to be imprisoned for a while until the emissary could pick her up. However, much to the emissary's chagrin, the blockade has now cut off the most viable route to get Torga back to her ancestral home. The sea corridor is closed and the chartered ship is moored with no means to leave Port Deepwater. And this brings us to the now, to a courtyard in a castle overlooking a bustling marketplace coming to life in the early morning hours, and a litter carried by local porters set down on the cobblestones, surrounded by a company of about a dozen mercenaries led by a somewhat unusual figure, an elf. And Torga standing there, taking in the scene of the emissary conferring with Elanis, the elven mercenary captain, about making their way out of the city, perhaps to the nearby coaching inn outside the walls where they can hire alternative transportation. And Elanis is not sure about what route to take, anticipating the unrest down in Port Deepwater. So, let's see where this goes, shall we? Hello friends, Anderson here. Welcome back to Knave episode 3, our solo zero prep campaign where we make it up as we go along even more than all the other times we've been playing solo so far. We've set the scene now and put some pieces in play. We also have a bit of an unknown there with a third person in that litter that has so far only been seen outlined behind a curtain conferring with the emissary. So that's as yet an unknown and will probably stay an unknown for the moment as Torga refuses to enter the litter and informs the emissary, who now returns to make everybody get a move on, that she's not one to be carried. Go ahead and climb in your little box for all I care, gelding. I'll walk. I think this is as much a matter of pride as it is sort of a contest of will and still trying to get a rise out of the emissary and also putting her in a position where she might have an easier time finding opportunities to escape. The question is the emissary going to let her get away with it? This is, I think, less a matter of her own personal skill and more a matter of the social norms the emissary operates under. Technically, Torga outranks him by quite a margin, but she's also currently in his charge, and he is the emissary of Karg, who in turn outranks Torga. So I think we're gonna do a closed question here, and we are going to skew this in the emissary's favor, meaning we are asking, will Torga be allowed to walk next to the litter while the emissary is being carried and whoever else is in there? Yes or no? We're rolling 2 dice with disadvantage because a no is much more likely. 2 12s, that is a yes, but. Yes, she is allowed, but I don't think they bind her. That would not really be befitting. But perhaps there is a honor binding sort of principle at play here where The emissary can be sure that some liberties can be taken as long as Torga gives her word of honor, which probably, going off of some cliches here, means a lot to orc society. If you fancy a walk to shake out your legs, be my guest, but I will have your word that you remain near me for the duration of our journey towards the coach house. And Torga shrugs and grunts assent. You have it, by my honor and the lack of yours. By the way, if you're keeping up with continuity, I had to redo the character sheet for Torga because I spilled coffee all over it, so we've broken that seal. Anyway, we have a situation at hand now where things get moving. The litter is picked up as the emissary enters and closes the door, but keeps the curtain somewhat pulled aside and maintains the ability to look out at Torga, who walks beside on the side where the emissary is sitting, and still wonders about that other person in there, but unable to catch a glimpse, just focuses on her surroundings as Ilanis and her mercenaries pick up the pace, descend the sloping cobbled road lined already by the first a little more grandiose houses down into the market, which is at this hour certainly quite active and loud and ringing with shouts of marketeers trying to outdo each other. But amidst the shouting of commerce, there are also cries that are perhaps a bit more alarming. The racket created by people climbing on barrels and shouting at their fellow citizens about this blockade and about how this is what you get when you let the current ruling family be in power. I'm assuming this isn't really democratic, but there are some families, some rich merchant families vying for control here, and occasionally one of them manages to install the current ruler of the city, while the others then fund all kinds of street gangs and proclaimers and agitators to make sure that they are perceived in the most negative possible light, which is what's happening here. There is a lot of unrest stirred now because of that blockade, which is partly what I assumed would happen and partly also what I just came up with to galvanize the situation here a bit and give us a chance that something might happen on the way out of town. And that's another question we ask now. Is this journey, this mercenary column of half a dozen front, half a dozen in the back, with the litter in the center, Torga walking next to it, making its way towards the exit gate undisturbed? Is the presence of the mercenary company enough to deter a potential mob? Or is the situation explosive enough for there to be city quarters already blockaded themselves, having thrown up barricades, with droves of people coming together and perhaps eager to show some sign of their dissatisfaction, seeing a litter carried by locals and protected by mercenaries as a fairly ideal target to blow off some steam. So, are we reaching the gate unmolested? I think this is as likely as not, so I'm not going to roll with advantage or disadvantage here. The mercenaries kind of skew things in favor of a yes, and the overall situation in Port Deepwater currently makes it about as likely that something happens. That is a 4, that is a clear no. So the litter is stopped in some way. I think we might, I don't know actually, should we trot out an encounter table for this to see what city encounters we can run into and create a scene from that? I think that's probably the way to go. So I'm going to take the city-state encounters from the Kent David Kelly line of books. I think this is another Old Skull, Castle Old Skull supplement. And there is an event table here which has a certain amount of potential occurrences that we can use. And it is a D1000, so I'm going to have to trot out a bunch of multicolored die 10 here. So let's roll our first D1000 of the channel and see what we generate. 577 maiden/noble falls from horse. Falls or is pulled? Because I think in the current climate, then we may have a situation here where the litter rounds a corner and enters a wider alley running parallel to a canal on the one side with a parapet preventing anyone from accidentally dropping in there. But this particular street is lined by a rather unruly bunch. It's hard to make out at first glance what this collection of people is exactly composed of, but they're all on the physical labor side of their overall physiques and stature. So it's quite an intimidating scene that has congregated around a white horse with a beautifully designed blanket draped over it, a gold embossed saddle to match, and atop of this, a young 4 to 6 is male, so a young man with a feathered headdress, like a beret sort of arrangement, flowing locks under it. The classic foppish youngster returning perhaps from a night of drinking and rather oblivious of what has actually happened, foggy in the head and just trying to get to bed as everybody else is starting up their day, and has now ridden into this assembly of people that are not letting him pass in the direction he wants to go and are shouting at him and are insulting him because they identified him as a member of a minor family that is associated with the ruling family that has now borne the brunt of the agitation caused by the blockade. And this mob is in the process of grabbing at the saddle, grabbing at the boots, trying to get his boots off, trying to even get him off the horse, as the mercenaries pull up short in front of this scene, and Elanis turns around, locking eyes with the emissary, who in turn leans out of his side of the litter to see what's going on, clocks the scene immediately, and with sort of a worried side eye at Torga standing there, rather intently fixated on all of this and maybe already weighing her options and how can I turn this into my advantage, presents us with the question of what does the emissary now think is the prudent thing to do here? Because we can assume the attention of the mob is currently on the noble being dragged from the horse, but there are stragglers on the side and people sitting on the parapet and in house entrances already looking at the litter drawing up and maybe thinking, oh, there comes the next piece of this morning's entertainment. And it won't be long before somebody shouts out to direct the attention of the mob at this new potential target. So what's a good question to ask here? I think it's, will the emissary try to turn the litter around and escape unnoticed before the mob can make them the next bit of sport? I think that's almost a given. The question is, will it work? So will the emissary be able to turn the litter around before the mob can round on them? That is about as likely as not, I think. So let's roll a die 20 and see what we get. We get an 11, which is a shakeup. Okay, so something else happens in this scene that invalidates the question or the situation, I guess. So does that mean something's coming up from behind? I think the fact that the noble is riding along this particular street also means that this is a thoroughfare into a nicer area that maybe goes past warehouses where these rather momentarily aggressive people are normally working. So given that, I could imagine that there is a V formation of horse riders barreling down this thoroughfare that Our litter carriers have joined through a T-junction just rounded the corner into the wider street. Ahead of them is the noble being pulled off the horse, and from behind now is this charge of household guard that were perhaps sent out to fetch this young noble, missed him at whatever brothel he spent the night, have now caught up with him and see, oh, he's in trouble, and they just don't care what's in the way. They have one mission only, and that is to prevent this mob from tearing this young man apart. So they are charging, and that means that very, very likely the litter will have to bear some of the brunt of the charge, meaning it will likely be tipped over as the mercenaries jump and try to get out of the way and not get trampled, and the litter carriers themselves also try and do the same. And Torga, in the meantime, tries and gets at the trunk, the rear. So tries to get behind the litter, because that is also potentially a safe place to stand, as it's an obstacle that a horse will likely shy away from and not be able to leap over. And it's also where her stuff is and where her weapon is. Maybe that we'll have to determine. Is the weapon outside of that chest because it's too big and unwieldy, or is it inside? That's for later. First, we have a couple of things to determine. One is, will the discipline be maintained? Will the mercenaries simply veer to one side, taking the litter and the carriers with them, leaving room for the charge to fly past them? Or will it be an explosion of chaos? They're too close. When they notice and the litter is dropped, everybody jumps into different directions, and that gives Torga the opportunity. Litter tipped over, yes or no? That is, I think, more likely than not. So I'm rolling 2 dice and skewing it towards a yes a little. That's a high 18, so yes, we have that moment of panic as mercenaries jump into house entrances. Some even leap over the parapet with a loud splash ensuing. The carriers drop the litter and start running towards the crowd, just forgetting about this measly day's pay that they have been offered and just securing their own hides. The litter tips over and Torga makes her move. This feels like a dexterity thing, right? This is kind of a dodge in a way, and then maybe followed up with some feat of strength if we need to. So let's make that dexterity check, which is a die 20 plus 2, and we need to beat a 15. That's a 20. Okay, so the exile pounces, and this is the moment she has been waiting for. She leaps towards the rear of the toppled over litter, throws out an arm as the chest starts sliding towards the edge and almost tips over and goes into the water. She yanks it away. And now is the question, does she also reach out another hand to grab the handle of her battle axe that was maybe wrapped in cloth atop of this chest, or behind it more likely? Or is it inside? About as likely as not, so we'll just roll the die 20 again. Is it inside? Yes or no? 2. No. Okay. No, it's not inside. Okay, it's outside. Oh, you gotta remember how I asked these questions. Is it inside? Yes or no? No, it's not inside. Yes, it's outside. So Torga's arm flies out, grabs the bundle that she's identified by the tip of the axe poking out from the wrapped cloth. She yanks it out of there, rips off the cloth as horses barrel by, screams ring out. The tip of the V formation already crashes into the crowd, sending people flying, bones shattering. Torga does not care in the slightest. She rips off the cloth, smashes the top of the chest, and inside grabs a bundle of her brigandine wrapped around the remainder of her little kit that she was traveling with. I just had to look something up quickly. So I think because we have a few small things here and we have our brigandine still in our hands, as soon as we put that on, including our battle axe. We're already at the maximum of our slots, which means we technically don't have room to carry our 2 days rations right now. So we'll leave them, meaning that we are currently in this city well armed and armored with a few knickknacks, but no food. And we also still have a promise to keep. Now I have kind of a perfidious plan for this, thinking as Torga might think. So in the carnage, in the chaos, in the mercenary still too scattered to do anything, she catches sight of Ilanis picking herself up from the ground, staring at her, now armed with the bundle in her hand, expression unreadable behind that veil, those cloth masks that these mercenaries wear. But of course, Torga intends to keep her honor-bound promise, which means she's now taking 2 strides towards the litter, reaches in that tipped over, now useless vehicle, and yanks out the emissary. Who, is he unconscious? Yes or no? Is he unconscious? Shake up. Ooh, shake up. Oh, I'm gonna shake it up with another yes or no question. Is he dead? 17. Yes. So, pulls him out of there, sees a dent in his skull where his head hit a corner inside there, the blood trickling from it, the eyes rolled up, the foam coming out of his mouth, and drops him again and runs off in the other direction. Freedom! Okay. Nice. That raises one more question. Are the mercenaries going to pursue, or are they staying with their charge? They've been hired presumably to protect the litter and the emissary, and not to act as guards for the guest. So perhaps it's more likely that they don't pursue. So will they pursue? I roll 2 dice and take the lowest. 13 and 19, yes, but. So they will pursue, meaning half a die 4 will pursue. Okay, so 1 pursues, which I take to mean that Ilanis shouts at one of her more junior, nimble members who is also near her, picking himself up after this horrendous, crushing stampede, to follow her and keep tabs on her, like track her, basically. So we don't have a pursuer that is trying to grab us. We have a pursuer that's trying to keep an eye on us, and maybe we don't immediately notice that we have a pursuer. So let's actually roll that for Torga. That's a wisdom check, and maybe that's even an opposed roll, actually. Let's maybe assume this junior member is merely a level 1, which means if we oppose the roll, we go by their dexterity bonus, which for this system's sake matches their level. So our difficulty to beat here with our wisdom is their dexterity defense, which is 10 plus bonus, so 11. So we have to beat an 11 with our +1 wisdom roll. And if we manage, then we are aware that we are being tracked. Nope, we are oblivious. So we are being tracked by one of Ilanis' mercenaries. And since we don't want to kill this story thread off, we assume, of course, whoever the other passenger in this litter was has survived. That's, by the way, just to insert a little bit of solo, well, not really advice, but just how I do things in here. I do like to do this when the opportunity presents itself, to introduce some more nebulous figures. So part of the reason I didn't want Torga to enter the litter is because I didn't want to know who the other person inside there was, because now that we have that person in play, the mysterious other companion of the emissary, we can make them the result of a die roll whenever that would make sense. So if we ever need a villain to spontaneously manifest and go, "Yaha, I have been pursuing you all this time," it could be that person. And that's why it, to me, always makes a lot of sense in solo play to keep a few assets around that you don't immediately resolve or explain. So do occasionally leave the curtain hanging there and just have a silhouette be there that isn't making an appearance quite yet. So we'll add this to the threads and notable NPCs. The thread is we are being tracked by Elanis' mercenaries. And the notable NPC is the unknown other person in the litter. And that also is a thread. What is their agenda? Presumably they work for Karg, but are they a minion of the emissary? Are they perhaps their more martial component? So the emissary deals with all the diplomatic stuff, and this is more the fixer that accompanies the emissary. That I like, actually. So we'll make this Karg's fixer. And I add a question mark just to leave some wiggle room in case the oracles in the future present us with a situation where this makes more sense to be Karg's fortune teller, sorcerers, whatever. We'll see. But we're on the lam now, so we have made it. We have our stuff. Torga ducks under an archway into a courtyard, through a narrow passageway into the back alleys, takes a breather and pulls the brigandine over, now clad in this long leather coat with armor platings on, the battle axe over her shoulder, just resting there, and that still disheveled, dirty, sunken-cheeked pale orc is now looking a whole lot more formidable. But she's hungry, she has not a coin to her name, and she is also being tracked, even though she's not aware of this. And it's a city in unrest. So let's simply keep it rolling and roll up another encounter event, because I think it is not unlikely that she is going to gravitate towards the more crowded areas now to kind of perhaps disappear in the crowd, even though that's somewhat hard for her stature. But maybe there is a notorious inn at the market where rumors are swapped and where she can pick up leads, maybe she can pick up work, she can perhaps hope to find I think that's her way of thinking. She can hope to find a kind of a caravan protection job now that land trade is the only option, and to find a way out of the city as quick as possible while at the same time making some coin and getting some food. So her objective is to reach that tavern. Does something happen on the way? I think that is likely, so we're rolling this with advantage. 18, that is a yes. So something happens on the way. Let us roll up another event. 171. Chamber pot emptied. So as Torga rejoices in her newfound freedom and walks along the back alleys of Port Deepwater, looking out around her for somebody following her, trying to avoid crowds, trying to not run afoul of any mobs, she doesn't look up, and that's where it hits her. And even though there is a half-hearted cry above her, "Look out below," all that accomplishes is that she looks up, and, well, I'll leave that to your imagination, but it's not a pretty sight. And I think that is as good a cut-off point as any. On that note, we'll pick it up next time. Thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you then, and bye for now.